Vanakkam. Today we are here to talk about the last book of KAMBARAMAYANAM called the YUDHAKANDam. This is a book about the war, which is the last part of KAMBARAMAYANAM. KAMBARAMAYANAM is the Ramayana, a Tamil version of Ramayana, written by the poet called Kamban.
Kamban actually gave the name Ramavataram to this epic. Although it is popularly known as KAMBARAMAYANAM, although it is based on Valmiki's Ramayanam, Kamban made some significant changes. I think before we go much further, we would like to pay tribute to Kamban, just like Kamban paid tribute to Valmiki at the beginning of the book.
Kamban was born in southern part of India, in Tamil Nadu, near a town called Karaikudi. He is actually recognized as one of the most three important poets in the Tamil literature. The three are Thiruvalluvar, Kamban and Ilangovadigal. You know that Thiruvalluvar wrote Thirukkural, everybody knows about that. And Ilangovadigal wrote Silappadigaram. I had an interest in KAMBARAMAYANAM because when I started studying KAMBARAMAYANAM, I found it one of the most romantic of any literature written in Tamil language. I mean, today we are not going to talk about the romantic aspect of KAMBARAMAYANAM. This is going to be about Udagandam, which is all about war. But even here you'll see many, many interesting aspects to this story.
It is interesting that Kamban chose to write about an Aryan prince who was born thousands of years ago in a far-off land. When he received the commission to write an epic from Vennayanallur Sadayappa Vallal, he could have written about the reigning Chola emperor who was at the zenith of his power. But Kamban chose Rama because Kamban loved Rama. And Kamban had studied the literature of the Vaishnavite saint poets, and he was influenced strongly by their treatise known as the Nalayira Divya Prabandham.
Whenever a new work in literature is actually published, we don't have publication of books like we do those days, and therefore they used to have a public reading of important book. And this is really called Arangetram. And Kamban had his Arangetram. And it is customary for poets not to be too upbeat about the work that they have done. And the poets usually are very polite about the work they have done, and it's usually a demonstration of modesty when these work are being read to the public. And Kamban actually does it really very beautifully. He says that he wrote about Kamban, or he wrote about Ramayanam not because he wanted to demonstrate his abilities in the Tamil language, but because he felt that Rama's beauty and Rama's, he really fell in love with Rama and he wanted to talk about him. And he also saw that as an enormous task, and he wondered whether he'd be able to do it well. So the first song that he says in the Abhayadakam goes like this. ஓசை பெற்று உயர் பார்க்கடல் உற்று ஒரு பூசை முற்றவும் நக்கு பூ புக்கென ஆசை பற்றி அறையலுற்றேன் காசில் கொற்றத்து அற்ற ராமன் கதையரோ. Indicates that he is a pure personality with no blemishes in him, and I wanted to write about that Rama. But the interest I had was like that of a cat. He describes a cat, a hungry cat, which is looking for food all over the place, and the cat suddenly comes across the ocean, and this ocean is actually the Milky Ocean, where Thirumal is lying there. It looks at the milk, a hungry cat looks at the milk, and it wants to drink all the milk, and it's impossible for it to drink all the milk. And he says, my feelings when I wanted to write about Ramayana were that of a hungry cat which is wanting to drink all the milk in the Milky Ocean. There is another song which he tells to the people as he was reading. He says that I may have made many mistakes while doing this poetry, and I would like you to really excuse me if I made mistakes, and to compare that when children are really drawing on the sand houses, when people draw, children are making rooms as line drawing on the seashore. No adult will find fault because we are only going to praise it. And he says, I'm like a child who's made an attempt to do this, and please don't find fault with me. And the poetry he wrote for that reads like this. He says, Arayum Adarangum Madapillaigal Tarayil Kirinil Tacharum Kaivaro. So when children are really drawing on the floor, no architect will come and look at it and say that this is all wrong drawing, and this is how my poetry is, and please excuse if I've made some mistakes.
Kamban was a poet par excellence. He was a storyteller like no other with a flair for drama, and he had a mastery of the Tamil language. It is this that attracted us both to him. We are practicing medical doctors. I am a pediatric surgeon and Professor Rela is a world-renowned liver transplant surgeon. But as far as the KAMBARAMAYANAM is concerned, we are merely students. In the last few years, we have been speaking on the Tamil stage about the KAMBARAMAYANAM, but this is our first attempt to bring it to the attention of an English-speaking audience. And it is a daunting task because the KAMBARAMAYANAM is composed of 10,500 verses and the YUDHAKANDAM alone has over 4,000 verses. I feel a little bit like that cat on the seashore wanting to drink up the entire ocean and knowing it is impossible. We would like to bring you the entire Udagandam with all its nuances and beauty, but it's not possible. So we'll try and bring you just the relevant parts. And at this point, we would like to thank Thiru Para Paraniyappan and Perasriyar Mutta Paraniyappan of the Karaikudi Kamban Kazhagam for giving us this opportunity.
I think for those of you who are not very familiar with Tamil names, I think it's important that you recognize the names of the characters that comes in Tamil Ramayanam. They're not very different, but while we are speaking, we don't want you to get confused. Rama, as you know, is called Raman in Tamil literature, and Lakshman is known as Ilakkuvan or Lakshmanan. Some people call Lakshmanan. We may use both of them. Lakshman is called Ilakkuvan. We're not going to talk about Bharadan or Satrughnan in this story that is coming through. Similarly, Ravana is called Ravanan, and Ravana has got two brothers, and one of them, as you know, is Kumbhakarnan. Sometimes we also call Kumbhakarnan Kumban, and his other brother, Vivishnan in Tamil is called Vedanan. Hanuman in Tamil is called Anuman.
So, the opening scene of the Udagandam is set at the seashore. Rama and the Vanara army have travelled for 12 long days and reached Rameshwaram. Rama is seeing the ocean for the very first time. He is awestruck by its expanse, but Kamban says that there is nothing compared to the extent of grief. The largeness of the ocean is nothing compared to the extent of grief he was feeling in his heart at having been parted from Sita.
The next scene is in Lanka, where in Ravana's palace, and Ravana is really angry and very disappointed. Hanuman has been in Sri Lanka, and when he left Sri Lanka, he burned down the city completely. The city has been rebuilt now by his own father-in-law, Mayan, who's an architect. He rebuilt the city even more beautifully. Really, everything was covered in bronze and it all looked very bright like gold. But it's been he's also been very upset that a monkey has come and destroyed Lanka. So he gathers all his ministers. It's called Mandir Alochanai, where he brings all of his ministers and his family members and the senior members of the family to really talk about it. It's just something like a war council, actually. I found this war council very, very interesting. He first asked all youngsters to leave and all the people unrelated to leave, and he only had elders there, his ministers there, and his own family members there, really to consult about what to do next. One of the things that I found which is amazing and which is not something that I expected was he had this council, and many people had their voices. Many people who were even against him had the opportunity to express their views, which I found, I think in the beginning of Ramayana, there is a council by Dasaratha where the decision is made really about making Rama the next ruler. And there were many discussions, but most of the discussions were really agreements of what Dasaratha was saying. Here the situation may be different, but it's interesting to see that you will see Ravana as really a dictator, a cruel person who will not listen to anyone. But to my surprise, really, many people had opposing views to Ravana, and many were quite open and not so fearing of Ravana when they were expressing their view. We'll just next talk about what the opinion of different elders and his family members were with respect to what has happened so far. Ravana has brought Sita and he's imprisoned her in Ashokavanam, and Hanuman came here to look for her. He could have taken her with him, but Sita didn't want Hanuman to take her. He wanted her to be rescued by Rama itself, and when he left, he really burnt down the city at the end, and Ravana really wanted to discuss the issues, and there is also a war looming. I don't know, he must have had spies who have said that Rama is really gathered on the other side of the sea, and he wanted to discuss what next with his council of ministers. Now, I mean, most of the scenes in KAMBARAMAYANAM is written like a drama, actually. So we are going to talk about how every scene, most of it comes as scene by scene, and the next scene is where Ravana is seated on his throne, and he's really looking very down, and he starts off by saying, "Suttadu kurangu eri sura yadida, kettadu kodinagar kilayum nanbarum, pattanar paribavam parandadu yanganum, ittadu ivariyanai irundadu en udal." He says that a monkey came and burnt down the city, and a number of my relatives, one of his own son was killed. He really felt very ashamed he felt very humiliated about what had happened. And he says, "I'm sitting on this throne looking big, but actually I'm sitting on his throne lifeless, and I almost feel dead about the whole of what happened so far," he said.
Once Ravana finishes, his council of ministers start to speak one by one. The first to speak is Pragattan. Pragattan boldly opposes Ravana. He says, "Ravana, you should have fought with Rama and won Sita fairly and squarely in battle. Instead, you brought her here by deceit. That is not the Asura way. So now, 2 men and a bunch of monkeys have come looking for her. We have to fight with them. That's not a difficult task. We can easily defeat them." Now, the others in that council speak along the same lines. Magodharan stands up and says, "It is not difficult at all to defeat this motley crew of men and monkeys." And he praises Ravana as the one who defeated the trinity of gods, Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva. But there is one dissenting voice, and surprisingly, that comes from Ravana's own brother Kumbhakarnan.
I think everybody knows Kumbhakarnan. Kumbhakarnan is a larger-than-life character. He's enormous in size, really. When he stands up, his high head sometimes even reaches the sky. And everybody knows him as somebody who sleeps for 6 months and then who eats for 6 months. And that's how everybody knows. But Kamban gives him a completely different character. It is true that he is enormous. It is true that he eats a lot. It is true that he sleeps a lot. But he's a man with a very strong sense of justice, really. Even though he's an Asura, he was a very good person among that crowd there. And he did not like the idea at all that his brother brought somebody else's wife and imprisoned her here, and he's actually claiming he's fallen in love with her. So he starts off really, I mean, he was quite harsh to his own brother. He loved his brother, but he can be very critical of his brother as well. First of all, he says, "Nannagar azhindadena naninai nayathal, உன்னுயிர் எனத்தகைய தேவியர்கள் உன்மேல் இன்னகை தரத்தர ஒருத்தன் மனையுற்றால் பொன்னடி தொழத்தொழ மறுத்தல் புகழ் போலாம்." So he says, you're mourning that your city has been destroyed by a monkey, but you've got somebody else's wife imprisoned, and this is in spite that there are thousands of women, thousands of beautiful women from our own people who are there for you all the time, and they are really craving for your attention, and yet you have brought another woman here, and you are saying that you're actually in love with her. How is that possible? And the other thing he really says to him is, I mean, what kind of a ruler are you that you are actually talking how brave you are and about your abilities as a warrior, and in your own heart, what you have is actually lust for another man's wife. And you know what this has done to you? Do you know what this has done to you? This has made you weak, that you are actually fearing human beings now. That's what this has led to. He says, Pesuvadu Veeram, you're talking about bravery. Idai penuvadu kanam, idai penuvadu kamam. Actually, it's lust that is in your heart. Kusuvadu manudarai nandru namakotram. What kind of a rule is this rule that now we have become afraid of human beings? Pesuvadu Veeram, idai penuvadu kamam, kusuvadu manudarai nandru namakotram. And really, after giving a lot of advice, he starts thinking slightly differently, because he is an asura at the end of the day. He feels that now that you've fallen in love with this woman and you don't want to give her up, and that's fair. I think he says, I accept that, but in order to make this right, you have to win over Rama. You have to seek him and win over Rama. It's no good that you wait for him to come to get his wife and then you fight him at that time. I think you need to make this right. And he says, let's go, let's cross the sea, go there, defeat Rama, and then Sita can rightfully become yours.
And at this point, Indrajit, Ravanan's oldest son, who is a great warrior, he stands up and starts to speak. He doesn't like Kumban's tone. He thinks it is cowardice to fear an army which is not even an army. He says, they have no horses, they have no chariots, they have no elephants. Why should we fear them? We can easily defeat them. Now Ravana's other brother, Vibhishanan, stands up and he silences Indrajit by telling him, you are immature, you don't know what you are talking. Then he turns respectfully to Ravana. He bows down to Ravana. And he starts by extolling Ravana's achievements, all of which were won by severe penance. Ravana had several boons to his credit.
Ravana is an asura. Everybody knows he's got 10 heads, 10 shoulders, and 10 crowns. Extremely strong character. And Rama really came to destroy him, because he was becoming really very difficult for the Devas, and his own all of the asuras and his own people were becoming very difficult. So Ravana was a big warrior, and he had 3 crore days of life, which was given to him by Shiva himself after a tapas for many, many years. And another interesting story about Ravana is that he is actually a Brahmin. He is a descendant of Brahma. And Brahma had also given him a boon that he cannot be defeated by anybody at war. So he really had 3 crores of life, and he is somebody who could not be defeated in war. He held the sword of Shiva as well, and therefore really for anybody to defeat Ravana is an impossible task.
Ravana also had several curses on his head. A girl called Vedavati, who was a daughter of a sage, wanted to marry Lord Narayana, but Ravana violated her. So she immolated herself in the pyre, and before she died, she cursed Ravana that she would be reborn, and in her next birth, she will be the cause of his destruction. So Vedanan reminds Ravana that Vedavati is this Sita. Ravana also received a curse from Nandi. He humiliated Nandi by calling him monkey-faced. And Nandi said, Ravana, you will meet defeat at the hands of a monkey. When Ravana got the boon from Brahma that he will remain undefeated by his enemies, he did not include men and animals in that list because he thought them as trivial. Vedanan says, now your opposing army is composed of men and animals. You have no immunity against them.
But there is also a history there. I said earlier that he is undefeated. Actually, he has been defeated by two people. One was actually a human called Karthaviriyan, who actually imprisoned him. And other that most people know is that he has been previously defeated by Vali, who's also a monkey king. So there is a history previously that Ravana can be defeated by humans as well as monkeys. And in spite of this, he still thinks that defeating humans and monkeys is not a great task. And he always looks upon this crowd of warriors who have come as somebody that he can easily defeat.
Vedanan continues speaking to Ravana. He praises Rama. He praises Rama as the one supreme Lord. And he says Rama is armed with the weapons given to him by Vishwamitra and by Agastya. He talks about Rama's great lineage, Rama's Raghuvamsha. And he tells Ravana about Rama's victory against their own brothers, Karan and Dudanan. Rama's victory against Vali. Ravana gets very angry with Vedanan. He misreads his brother's advice and he considers it an insult. But Vedanan doesn't stop. He persists and tells Ravana the story of another Asura emperor known as Hiranyakashipu, whose son Prahladan worshipped Lord Narayana, and Lord Narayana came as Narasimha to kill Hiranyakashipu. Vedanan says it is that same Narasimha who has now come as Rama. When Ravana hears this, he explodes with anger. He accuses Vedanan of being the poison that has come to destroy the Asura race. He threatens to kill Vibhishanan and he banishes him from the kingdom. At this point, Vedanan is done with all his arguments. As soon as Ravana banishes him, he ascends up into the sky with 4 of his ministers and they briefly debate what they should do next. The ministers advise Vedanan that he should go to Rama because Rama is the upholder of Dharma. They say, மாட்சியில் அமைந்தது வேறு மற்ற இல்லை தாட்சியில் பொருள் தரும் தருமமூர்த்தியை காட்சியே இனி கடன் என்று கல்விசால் சூழ்ச்சியின் கிழவரும் துணிந்து சொல்லினார். Vedanan also is of the same mind, but he clearly defines his objective in surrendering to Rama. He says, எல்லையில் பெருங்குணத்து ராமன் தாளினை புல்லுதும் புல்லி பிறவி போக்குதும். He says, my purpose in surrendering to Rama is to obtain salvation. Here he stands apart from all asuras. He does not want material gains. His goals are mukti. He wants to end this endless cycle of birth and death.
So he already knows that Rama is actually God.
Yes, he believes Rama to be the supreme God incarnated as a human being, and Vedanan makes it very clear that his intention is to obtain salvation, and Kamban establishes the fact that Vedanan had no ulterior motives in approaching Rama. So
he's not going there to defeat his brother to get the kingdom.
No, Kamban makes it very clear that Vedanan's motives were all noble. So Vedanan reaches Rama's camp, and Rama assembles his own council to debate if Vedanan's surrender should be accepted or not. As usual, Rama in his endearing fashion, he lets the members of his council speak before he expresses his views. He does not want his wishes to cloud their opinions.
This is very similar to the council of Ravana. He is asking for opinion, and it's always been like that. Rama has also been always asking for opinion from his brothers and from Hanuman all the time before he makes decisions.
That's right. But the only difference is that when Ravana asks for an opinion, he doesn't take an opposing view. Rama accepts opposing views. And here there are a lot of opposing views. For instance, Sugrivan says that Vedanan's surrender should not be accepted. He says, how can you trust somebody who has betrayed his own brother? And I think that's ironic, because Sugrivan is the one who wanted Rama to defeat Vali.
This is interesting, isn't it? Sugrivan is Vali's brother.
That's right.
Vali's younger brother, who took the help of Rama to get him killed. He got the kingdom of Kishkinda by fighting his own brother, and everybody knows that it's a very controversial killing of Rama, where Rama was hiding behind a tree to kill Vali. So Sugriva went against his brother, and now the same person is telling Rama, you cannot trust somebody who is going against his brother. Now he says, Vidyanan is really betraying his own brother. How can you trust somebody like that? In fact, earlier on, even Lakshman said this to Rama when he was trying to help Sugrivan and to kill Vali. Lakshman says to Rama, I don't like this. I don't like what you're doing. You are trusting someone who is going against his brother. I mean, Lakshman loves his brother. Lakshman loves Rama. And he believes that no brother should go against his own brother. And therefore, Lakshman was very suspicious of Sugriva then. And now Sugrivan is very suspicious of Vidyanan because he's going against his own brother.
That's right. And the other members of the council also oppose Rama's Vidyanan's surrender. Jambavan, the bear king, stands up and says, all asuras are the same. None of them can be trusted. So how can you trust this one? One by one, every member of the council opposes Vidyanan's surrender. And finally, Rama turns to Hanuman, who has not spoken a single word, although he is the only one who has met Vidyanan in Lanka. And Rama asks Hanuman his opinion. In Hanuman's silence lies Hanuman's greatness.
Hanuman is well recognized as really very good with his words. I mean, he's very silent most of the time. But when he speaks, really it makes sense and everybody really has to listen to what he says. And Rama recognized it the very first time he met him. I think the first time he met him was when he was going to see Sugriva for help. And Hanuman was actually Sugriva's, one of the ministers of Sugrivan. And Sugrivan sends to find out who Rama and Lakshman were as they were walking down, because he was scared of them, really. So Hanuman goes down. He is dressed up like a Brahmin, and he goes to meet Rama. He knows that Rama and Lakshman were very noble people. And when he meets him, he introduces himself. And this is the first time Raman and Hanuman meet each other. And that introduction says everything, really. I mean, I said he only speaks a few words. And in one verse, he praises Rama for his looks and his abilities and immediately tells who he is. He only says about 4 lines and Rama recognizes him as somebody who's superior in communication. He says, Manjana tiranda kola meniya மகளிர்க்கெல்லாம் நஞ்சனத் தகையாயி நளிரும் பனிக்கு தேம்பா கஞ்சம் ஒத்து அலர்ந்த செய்ய கண்ண யான் காற்றின் வேந்தற்கு அஞ்சனை வயிற்றில் வந்தேன் நாமமும் அனுமன் என்பேன். He says, I am the son of Vayu and my mother is Anjanai. My name is Hanuman, he says. And what he says really impresses Rama greatly. The way he said it, really Rama fell for him. And he immediately acknowledges his abilities and he calls him Sollin Selvan, which translates as master of words. So from then on now, I think he is very popularly known as master of words.
Kamban calls Hanuman the Nava Vyakarana Panditan, a master of the 9 schools of knowledge. And Hanuman never speaks unless spoken to. And when he speaks, he makes perfect sense. And the most important thing about Hanuman is that his word is always the final word. This is how it is with people who are knowledgeable. Unlike empty vessels, they hardly make a noise. When Rama asks Hanuman to speak, he offers a clearly contrary opinion to what has been said thus far. Hanuman says that Vedanan should be accepted because Vedanan is different from the other asuras. He says, I saw evidence of this when I went to Lanka. When I was passing by Vedanan's palace, the smoke that was coming out was the smoke from Vedic omams and yagams being conducted there. And he says, Vedanan's daughter, Tirisadai, the one with 3 plaits, he says, Tirisadai is a staunch friend of Sita. And Tirisadai is the one who told Sita that there is a curse on Ravana, that if he touches an unwilling woman, his 10 heads will burst into 1,000 pieces. This information makes Sita very bold. She knows that Ravana cannot lay a finger on her. Hanuman also says that Vedanan saved Hanuman's life. When Ravanan wanted him to be killed, when he was captured in Lanka, Vedanan says it is a crime to kill a messenger. So Hanuman concludes by saying that we must accept Vedanan into our fold. Rama is very happy. He says, Perarivala nandru nandru. Perarivala means epitome of knowledge. So Rama is also of the same mind. He wants to accept Vedanan into his fold, and then he defines his policy of Sharanagati. This Sharanagati Tattvam is actually the crown jewel of the Ramayana.
Before you talk about Sharanagati Tattvam, it's just striking to me how everything changes. In fact, Hanuman is saying that they should accept Vedanan. In fact, Shukrivan is saying they should not accept Vedanan. Not long before this, Sugriva was the boss for Hanuman, actually. Now I think the situation's changed so much, and in front of Rama, Hanuman's got much higher place than Sugriva himself. Even though Hanuman was the servant, he actually calls himself, when he introduced himself first, he calls himself the servant of Sugriva. So that's really interesting that he's able to express his views without any worry, even though his boss has said something completely opposite of what he said.
That's right. And Rama is thinking exactly like Hanuman. And in his Sharanagati Tattvam, Raman says, I will accept into my fold even a man who has killed my own parents, because if I deny him surrender, I will be defaming myself. Even if this man were to turn against me later on, I will be the better person for having accepted it. Indru vandan endru undo, endayai yayai munnai kondru vandan endru undo, அடைக்கலம் கூறுகின்றான் துன்றி வந்து அன்பு செய்யும் துணைவனும் அவனே பின்னை பின்றும் என்றாலும் நம்பால் புகழன்றி பிரிது உண்டாமோ. He then goes on to say the following immortal words. உடைந்தவர்க்கு உதவானாயின் உள்ளது ஒன்றும் ஈயானாயின் அடைந்தவர்க்கு அருளானாயின் அரணென்னாம் ஆண்மையென்னாம். If I refuse to protect the man who has surrendered to me, can I be considered as a human being? If I turn away the man who needs my help, will that be dharma? Will that be accepted as dharma? This is the point where Rama truly comes into his own, and he towers above all else. Kamban refers to Rama as Nadayil Nindruyar Nayagan, the greatest among men, and this is where Rama truly becomes Nadayil Nindruyar Nayagan. And there is no ulterior motive. Again, Kamban establishes clearly there is no ulterior motive. Rama is offering protection to Vedanan out of the goodness of his heart and because of his firm faith in justice. Now, when Rama wants to accept Vedanan, nobody opposes him. Vedanan is brought before Rama. Vedanan sees Rama first time and he is overpowered with love because Rama appears to him as the embodiment of dharma. He says, Veeranai nokki angam menmayir silirpa kannir vaara nenju urugi sengan anjanamalai andru agin கார்முகில் கமலம் பூத்தது அன்று இவன் கண்ணன் கொலாம் ஆரருள் சுரக்கும் நீதி அரநிறம் கரிதோ என்றான். Rama is dark skinned. Kamban says Rama's skin is the color of mai, kajal, it is jet black. So Vedanan looks upon Rama in amazement and says, I did not know that the color of Dharma was black. And he falls at Rama's feet, and Rama raises him up, and Rama gives him the kingdom of Lanka. Now this is very interesting. Lanka still belongs to Ravana. Ravana is the crowned king of Lanka, and Rama now anoints Vidanan as the king of Lanka, which means Rama has no doubt in his mind that Lanka can be conquered. Another thing is, Rama has no feudal ambitions of his own. He doesn't want Lanka for himself. His only aim in going to Lanka is to rescue Sita. But what happens here is that Vidanan also is not interested in kingship. When they make hasty preparations to crown him king, Vidanan requests Rama that he should be crowned like Bharata with Rama's padukas rather than with a conventional crown. So Vidanan is now crowned as king, and Rama retreats into a shell. Rama is once more grieving for Sita, and it is up to Sugrivan to point out to Rama the obvious advantages of having Vidanan in his fold. It is only after this that Rama calls Vidanan and asks him about Lanka's fortifications. That means both parties, Vidanan and Rama, they both wanted to uphold Dharma, and that is why they both approached each other.
So it looks like Sugrivan has accepted Vidanan now.
Yes.
And he is going to ask him about how Lanka is fortified and all of that. I keep going back to comparing Sugrivan and Vidanan. In fact, it's interesting, I think we talk about it a bit later, that Rama calls both Vidanan and Sugrivan as one of his brothers. He's accepted. He's not actually said that about, which has surprised me. He's not called Anuman his brother. In fact, he's called Vidanan one of his brothers and Sugrivan one of his brothers. But I think of the two brothers, I think Vidanan, the brother of Ravana, is much, much more superior in my mind than Sugrivan, the brother of Vali, because that's how really Kamban shows the two characters. I just want to bring the differences between the two. I mean, it's amazing that Rama crowns Vidanan as the king of Lanka now. Rama has not actually captured Lanka yet, and yet he thinks that it is his to give away to Vidanan. And Vidanan politely accepts that and has accepted being crowned as the king of Lanka and becomes the king of Lanka. This says a lot about the confidence that Vidanan has on Rama. He's got a huge trust in Rama. And if Rama says, you're the king of Lanka, and Vidanan has accepted himself as the king of Lanka. But if you compare this with Sugrivan, when Rama went to Sugrivan, there is a difference here actually. Vidanan came to Rama for protection, whereas Rama went to Sugrivan for his Vanara soldiers, really, for his monkey soldiers, in order to go and find, and in order to go and fight with Ravana. So Rama went to Sugrivan for a favor, but when he went to Sugrivan, Sugrivan said, I need help myself because I'm hiding from my brother Vali, and that's when Rama said that he promises to help him with Vali. But when Rama said, I can fight Vali, Sugrivan did not believe him. He didn't think that he had the ability to fight Vali. In fact, he asked Rama to demonstrate his strength, and Rama actually throws an arrow at a row of trees, 7 trees, and Rama's arrow pierces all the 7 large trees and then goes up everywhere and then returns back to him. It's only then Sugrivan believes Rama's abilities. I don't think Sugrivan ever saw Rama as God or God reincarnate, whereas Vidanan saw him as God. And there is a huge difference between how Sugriva perceived Rama and Vidanan perceived Rama.
That's right. And Vidanan worshipped Rama. Vidanan described Lanka's fortifications to Rama. Vidanan spoke about the strength of the Vanara army, the might of Ravana's generals, and finally he spoke about Ravana himself and said to Rama that only you can defeat Ravana. Vidanan does not stop with this. He goes on to explain all that Anuman did in Lanka. Anuman killed half of Ravana's army when he went to Lanka. Hanuman killed every single Asura who was sent to confront him. Hanuman killed Ravanan's own son, Akkakumaran. He did this by grinding him into the ground like you would crush a mosquito with your foot. Hanuman also set fire to Lanka. And when he came back to Rama, he only spoke about his meeting with Sita. He did not tell Rama all this. So Rama hears of this for the first time from Vedanan, and Rama is amazed and he showers praise on Hanuman. He says, Ennadu ஆக்கிய வலியோடு அவ்விராவணன் வலியும் உன்னது ஆக்கினை பாக்கியம் உரு கொண்டது ஒப்பாய் முன்னதாக்கிய மூவுலகாக்கிய முதலோன் பின்னது ஆக்கிய பதம் நினக்கு ஆக்கினேன் பெற்றாய். He says, by destroying Ravana's pride, you stand tall. By doing the job that I should have done in Lanka, you stand even taller. In fact, you have risen to such great heights that I will crown you as the next Brahma. Now, Rama has a task ahead of him. He has to cross the ocean. And here, Vedanan gives him advice about how to do it. Vedanan asks Rama to pray to Varuna, who is the god of the ocean.
Rama doesn't just ask for help, he surrenders to Varuna actually. He sits on a bed of grass by the sea and chants the Varuna Mandiram. For almost 7 days he was praying for Varuna, but Varuna does not appear at all. Now Rama loses patience because he's not used to people not paying attention to him. And he says that Varuna must think that I've been weakened because I've allowed for my wife to be abducted by Ravana. He feels really let down by Varuna because he's not answered him for almost 7 days. Rama is really very angry and he wants to show him who he really is. Then Rama really attacks the ocean with several arrows and the ocean is set on fire and still there is no sign of Varuna. And finally really Rama shoots the Brahmastram. The Brahmastram is one of the deadly weapons, and I think it's the last of the weapon Rama uses really to bring destruction on people. So as soon as he throws the Brahmastram on the ocean, Varuna appears immediately. And this time Varuna is really scared and he surrenders to Rama. In fact, earlier on Rama surrenders to Varuna in order to bring him to ask him for a favor. Now Varuna gets scared of Rama and he surrenders to Rama. Rama is really inquiring what's happened and why he did not turn up in time, and Varuna has a very lame excuse. He says, oh, I'm sorry, I was at the other end of the ocean sorting out some quarrel among sharks. I think Rama must have thought, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And he accepts it. He does not want to really go into an argument with him. And he accepts because Rama really needs his help. And he's asking Varuna to really part the ocean so that his army and his people can cross the ocean to reach Lanka. But Varuna says that it's not appropriate, it's against nature to part the ocean. Rama brings the architect called Nala, who helps build the bridge, and finally with the help of all the Vanaras and everybody, all the Vanaras and the soldiers, he builds the bridge across the ocean, the Sedu bridge, in order to cross the ocean.
Rama looks upon this bridge and Kamban says he feels such joy in his heart as if he had seen Sita himself. And Rama crosses over with the army to the other side and he camps on the outskirts of Lanka. When 2 spies, Asura spies, are discovered in Rama's camp disguised as Vanaras. Vedanan identifies them as Asuras and immediately the Vanaras capture them. They tie them up so tight that these Asuras start bleeding from the mouth. When Rama hears of this, he asks them to be released and he says, if we are cruel to them, then what is the difference between them and us? And then he sends the spies back to Ravana with an ominous message. He says, go and tell Ravana that Rama is here with his unbreakable bow. Go and tell Ravana that he is no longer the king of Lanka. Vedanan has become the king of Lanka. Go and tell Ravana that even if all the gods in heaven come to defend him, I will find him and kill him and cut him into 1,000 pieces. The spies run back to Ravana only to find that Ravana has convened another war council in the dead of the night. Malyavan is speaking to Ravana, begging him to let go of Sita. Ravana gets angry with Malyavan, and at this point, the spies come and deliver Rama's message. Ravana gets even more furious. He says that he refuses to believe that Rama has the power to defeat him. At this point, Malyavan again reiterates to Ravana that he doesn't know who his enemies truly are. He says that the Vanaras are devas who have been reincarnated and they have come here to kill you. Rama is the one supreme God who has come here only to kill you. Please don't go for war. But Ravana brushes all this aside and he climbs up on his fortress to look upon the Vanara army. Rama is also looking upon the Asura army from his vantage point. So both adversaries are facing each other for the first time. And Ravana immediately recognizes Rama. He tells his spies, I know who that is, but explain who all the others are who are standing with him. So the spies introduce all the generals who are on Rama's side. Now Vidhanan is doing the same thing for Rama. Vidhanan is introducing all of Ravana's generals to him. And the moment Vidhanan identifies Ravana as Ravana, Sugrivan does something extremely surprising.
Yeah, this is a surprise for everyone. We all know that Sugriva is a monkey king. So he leaps on. He leaps on without Ravana expecting anything. He jumps over him. And then the both of them are actually fighting with each other. And like all monkeys do, he just lifts his crowns and then jumps off the wall and comes back with a crown of Ravana back to Rama. Now this really was a surprise attack on Ravana, and Ravana gets really angry and feels very sorry. And Rama is also very upset by this act really of suddenly jumping and fighting the enemy. And Rama tells Sugriva, you shouldn't have done this. You could have easily got killed. You went on your own there to fight Ravana, and you should never act in such an impulsive manner. And he tells him, you're such an important person for us, and we need you, because the army that we have brought here is your army, and the people here are all your people, and if we lose you, we'll really lose this battle. And so he advises him really not to get so angry.
And it's not just this. It's Rama says to Sugriva that if I lose you, I stand to lose everything. Because if I lose you, I will kill myself. And then Ilakuvan will kill himself. And then there's no point retrieving Sita. You see, Rama has acknowledged Sugrivan's importance. Rama has acknowledged Sugrivan's role in getting them thus far. And as far as Rama is concerned, he loves Sugriva as much as he loves Ilakuvan and as much as he loves Sita. I think this is proof of Rama's ability to love and Rama's philosophy of universal brotherhood.
I think there is one important song about universal brotherhood. I think whenever Rama comes across people he likes, I think he develops affection for them in a very brotherly manner. And this brotherhood really started from the time he crossed the Ganges river with the help of Guhan, and he told Guhan that you are my fifth brother. When he met Sugrivan, he called him his sixth brother. And when he met Vidhanan, he called him the seventh brother. When he met Vidhanan, he said this to him. He said, Guhanudan Aivaranem Munbu, Pinbu Kundrusulwan Mahanudan Arvaranem, Yemmurai Anbin Vanda Akanamar Kadal Aya, Ninnudan Yervaranem, Puhalaru Kanam Tandu, Pudalvaral Purindan Nundai. I mean, this song, I don't know if you don't understand Tamil, I think you really miss something in life. I mean, he says, with Guhan we became five, and then with the son of the sun god, Surya, who is Sugriva. Sugriva was meant to be the son of the sun god. With him, we became six. And then he says, with you, we became 7. The brother of Ravana, with you, we became 7. He says, my father sent me to this beautiful forest and he rained brothers for me. He looks at Sugriva and says, your father, because he's become his son. He's become Dasratha's son, and he says, your father sent me to the forest and he's now pouring brothers. Everywhere I go, I'm coming across brothers. And I'm so pleased that my father sent me to the forest.
That's right. And I think it is in tender moments like this that the Ramayanam really comes alive, and it reminds us that Rama's greatness is not his strength in battle, but his greatness lies in his ability to love. That is something the world lacks right now. So at this point, the Vanara army has laid siege to Lanka, to the 4 corners of Lanka, and Ravana's army is defending its walls. At this 11th hour, Rama wants to send another messenger of peace to Ravana. Rama has already sent 2 messengers. He has sent Hanuman and he has sent the Asura spies, but now he wants to send a 3rd messenger. Ilakkuvan has had enough of this. Ilakkuvan, Lakshmanan, Rama's younger brother, who stayed with him in the forest for 13 years and didn't sleep for a moment. He spent his entire time taking care of Rama. He hasn't spoken a word since they came to Lanka. He did not express his views during the Vidana Saranagati, but now he starts to speak and he doesn't mince words. Ilakkuvan says to Rama, why do you want to show mercy to this intolerably cruel Asura? This Asura who brought Sita, captured her and kept her in the Ashokavanam. Why do you want to show kindness to this Asura who killed Jatayu, who was like a father to us? And why do you want to forgive him and give him a chance at redemption? தேசியை சிறையில் வைத்தான், தேவரை இடுக்கண் செய்தான், பூசரர்க்கு அலக்கண் ஈந்தான், மண்ணுயர் புடைத்து தின்றான், ஆசையின் அளவும் எல்லா உலகமும் தானே ஆழ்வான், வாசமும் திருவும் கொண்டான், வழியிலா வழிமேல் செல்வான். Ilakkuvan also points out a practical problem to Rama. He says, if Ravana accepts your surrender, what will you do with Lanka? You yourself have anointed Vidanan as king of Lanka. If Ravana surrenders to you, will you take Lanka away from Vidanan and give it to Ravana? And then he reminds Rama of the promise he made to the sages of the Dandakaranyam forest. Rama promised the sages of the Dandakaranyam forest that he will kill Ravana and destroy the Asuras. So Ilakkuvan says, are you going to go back on that promise now? And he says to Rama, why are you reluctant to fight Ravana? Is it your sense of dharma? Or is it the fact that the city is so beautiful, you don't want to destroy it? Is this what makes you desist? Rama smiles at Ilakkuvan and he says, I know Ravana will not accept my offer, but in the name of dharma, I have to make this offer. And so he sends Angadan, Vali's son, Sugriva's nephew, as a messenger to Ravana. Angadan says, Budha Nayagan, Neer Soolnda Puvikku Nayagan, Appumel Seedai Nayagan, Veru Ulla Deiva Nayagan, Nee Seppum Veda Nayagan, Mel Nindra Vidikku Nayagan, Than Vitta Thudanyan. When Ravana hears Rama's name, he starts to insult Rama. But when he finds out that Angadan is Vali's son, he is surprised. And he is surprised because Angadan has chosen to fight for Rama, who killed his own father Vali. So Ravana invites Angadan over to his side. He says, why don't you join forces with me? Angadan is very sarcastic. He says, the Asuras are on the losing side. That is why your own brother Vidanan deserted you. What Angadan means is the Asuras are going to be destroyed. So Vidanan left Ravana. Why would Angadan join Ravana? And then Angadan delivers Rama's message. Angadan says, do you remember Tadagai, your grandmother? Do you remember Marichan, your uncle? Do you remember Karan and Dudanan, your brothers? They were all killed by Rama. Do you remember Hanuman, who set fire to Lanka? He is Rama's messenger. Do you remember Sugrivan, who came and took away your crown? He is Rama's friend. If you remember all of them, Ravana, stop this war and give up Sita. Ravana explodes with anger. He orders for Angadan to be captured. Angadan fights with the Asura soldiers and returns back to Rama. Angadan has only one thing to say to Rama. Murkan mudindilai atrabodu andri. This will not end until you kill Ravana. So now the scene is set for the war.
Today we stop here. This is all about the prelude to the war. This is all about what happens just before the war begins. We'll start again in another session with actually the first war where Ravana himself goes and encounters Rama. There are many interesting aspects to the war, and I hope that you've enjoyed what we have said so far, and I hope and I believe that the next session is going to be even more interesting. Thank you.